There comes a moment on the twin flame journey that almost no one talks about. Not the first meeting. Not the magnetic pull. Not the separation, the longing, or the pain that keeps you awake at night. There is another moment, quieter, less dramatic, but far more powerful. It is the moment when thinking about your twin flame no longer hurts. No tightness in your chest. No racing thoughts. No desperate need for signs, messages, or reassurance from the universe. And strangely enough, this moment often feels confusing, because many people believe that if the pain disappears, the connection must be gone. But what if the opposite is true? What if the moment the obsession fades is the moment the twin flame connection finally begins to mature? This video is not for those who are still chasing, waiting, or hoping to be chosen. This is for those who feel something shifting inside them. For those who are tired, not just of the other person but of their own suffering. If you are here, chances are you've already walked through the fire. You've experienced the intensity people romanticize. You've felt the emotional highs and devastating lows. You've told yourself that the pain must mean something, that it must be part of the spiritual process. And for a long time, maybe that belief helped you survive. But eventually, a question arises, softly at first, then louder each day. If this is a soul connection, why does it feel like it's destroying me? This question is not a failure of faith. It is the beginning of clarity. Because here is a truth that challenges everything we've been taught about twin flames. A connection that keeps you stuck in suffering is not meant to last in that form. The early stage of the twin flame journey is often misunderstood as love. In reality, it is activation. Your twin flame doesn't arrive to complete you. They arrive to expose what has been incomplete within you all along. Your unmet needs. Your abandoned inner child. Your fear of being alone. Your belief that love must be intense to be real. This is why the connection feels overwhelming. Presses directly on your wounds. It lights up your nervous system. It feels impossible to ignore, not because it is perfect but because it is unfinished. And when something is unfinished inside you, your mind turns it into obsession. You replay conversations. You search for hidden meanings. You interpret coincidences as signs. You ask the universe questions you are not ready to hear the answers to. At this stage, the twin flame becomes a symbol, not of partnership but of lack. Lack of closure. Lack of security. Lack of self-trust. And so the cycle continues, until one day something breaks. Not the connection, the pattern. You wake up and realize you are exhausted. Not from missing them, but from missing yourself. The constant analysis feels heavy. The spiritual explanations no longer soothe you. Even the idea of reunion doesn't bring relief anymore. Instead of asking, when will they come back? A different question appears. What if peace matters more than answers? This is the turning point. The moment when the twin flame stops being an external fixation and starts becoming an internal lesson. First, it feels unsettling, because obsession gave you a sense of purpose. Pain gave the connection meaning. Without the drama, you may wonder, was it ever real? But this question misses something essential. The connection was real. The suffering was real. What was never meant to last was the identity built around waiting, longing, and hoping. Here is something few spiritual teachings say clearly. Twin flame energy is not meant to keep you stuck in longing. It is meant to move you toward wholeness. When the obsession begins to dissolve, it doesn't mean the bond has disappeared. It means the bond is no longer hijacking your nervous system. You can think of it like fire. At first, fire burns wildly. It consumes everything in its path. It demands attention. But once it has done its work, what remains is warmth, not destruction. The early twin flame phase is the fire. The later phase is the warmth. And warmth does not scream. It does not demand. It does not hurt. Simply is. This is where many people get confused. They mistake intensity for love. They mistake anxiety for connection. They mistake obsession for destiny. But destiny does not cost you your peace. Real soul alignment does not require you to abandon yourself. If you are beginning to feel calm where there was once chaos, something profound is happening. You are completing a cycle. A cycle that began the moment you believed love had to be earned through pain. A cycle that taught you to look outside yourself for validation, meaning, and worth. Ending this cycle does not mean rejecting the twin flame connection. It means redefining it. Instead of asking what they feel, you start noticing how you feel. Instead of interpreting signs, you start listening to your body. Instead of waiting, you start living. And slowly, something extraordinary occurs. The twin flame stops being the center of your emotional universe. You become the center again. From this place, the connection no longer controls you. It no longer defines your value. It no longer determines whether you feel whole or broken. And only from this place can something new emerge. Not obsession, not longing, not pain disguised as spirituality, but a different kind of bond. One that does not ask you to chase. One that does not require you to suffer. One that exists without drama. A partnership of souls, if and only if both have reached this level of inner completion. And if they haven't, you still win. Because the true purpose of the twin flame journey was never reunion. It was liberation. In the next chapter, we will explore what actually happens when the obsession fades, and why this phase, though quieter, is the most powerful transformation of all. Because the end of suffering is not the end of the journey. It is the moment the journey finally becomes yours. If the obsession is fading, something important needs to be understood. Otherwise, the mind will try to rebuild the old story just in a different form. Because the human mind does not like emptiness. When intensity disappears, it rushes to replace it with explanations. And the most common explanation is this: I still hurt because they were my twin flame. But what if the pain was never truly about them? What if the twin flame did not cause your suffering, but simply revealed what was already waiting to be healed? This distinction changes everything. In the beginning, it feels impossible to separate the pain from the person. Your emotions seem tied to their actions, their absence, their choices. When they pull away, you hurt. When they come close, you feel alive. So naturally, you conclude, they are the source of my pain and my happiness. But this belief quietly hands your power away. Because if another person controls your inner state, you are no longer living, you are reacting. Twin flame connections are powerful precisely because they interrupt this pattern. They don't soothe your wounds. They press directly into them. That's why the pain feels unbearable. It activates memories you didn't know you were still carrying. Abandonment, rejection, feeling unseen, feeling unchosen. Often, these wounds did not begin with your twin flame. They began much earlier. In childhood, in early relationships, in moments when love felt conditional, unstable, or unsafe. The twin flame doesn't create these wounds. They mirror them. And mirrors are not gentle. They don't lie. They don't soften the image. They show you exactly where you are fragmented. This is why logic never helps in the early stages. Friends can tell you to move on. Spiritual teachings can tell you to detach. Your mind can try to rationalize the situation, but none of it works. Because the pain is not happening in your thoughts. It is happening in your nervous system. Your body reacts before your mind can intervene. Your heart tightens. Your breath shortens. Your stomach drops. This is not romance. This is activation. Your twin flame touches a place inside you that was frozen in time. A place that learned to equate love with uncertainty. And when that place is triggered, obsession feels inevitable. Obsession is not desire. It is survival. The mind fixates because it believes the other person holds the key to relief. If they come back, I'll be okay. If they choose me, I'll be whole. If I understand the lesson, the pain will stop. But here is the difficult truth. No one outside of you can regulate what was dysregulated long before they arrived. The twin flame did not break you. They showed you where you were already breaking. This realization can feel confronting. First, it may even feel invalidating. You might think, so was it all in my head? No. The connection was real. The emotions were real. The intensity was real. But the source of the pain was misunderstood. When you believe the other person is responsible for your inner state, you stay trapped in a loop of waiting, of interpreting signals, of hoping for change. This loop feels spiritual, but it is actually psychological. And spiritual growth begins the moment you see the difference. Here is a question worth sitting with. If my twin flame disappeared from the earth tomorrow, would the pain inside me disappear with them? For most people, the honest answer is no. Because the pain does not belong to the connection. The pain belongs to the wound. This is why separation is such a central part of the twin flame journey. Not as punishment, not as cruelty, but as necessity. Separation removes the distraction. Without constant interaction, the wound has nowhere to hide. You can no longer project healing onto the other person. You are forced slowly, painfully to turn inward. This is the phase most people resist. Because turning inward feels lonely, feels unfair, feels like losing something precious. But in reality, you are losing an illusion. The illusion that another person is meant to complete what you never learned to hold yourself. As the obsession fades, something subtle changes. You may notice moments of calm that feel unfamiliar. Moments where you don't check your phone. Moments where their name doesn't trigger an emotional wave. At first, this calm can feel empty, even boring. Because your nervous system has been addicted to intensity. Pain became stimulation. Longing became meaning. Letting go of this addiction is not instant. It happens in layers. One layer of identification at a time. You stop asking what they are doing. Then you stop imagining conversations. Then you stop narrating your life to someone who isn't there. And eventually, a deeper question emerges. Who am I without this story? This question marks the beginning of true healing. Because now, the twin flame is no longer the center. You are. From this place, you start to see the connection differently. Not as something that was taken from you, but as something that served a purpose. It awakened you. Cracked open parts of you that were numb. It forced you to confront patterns you might have lived with unconsciously for decades. And once that purpose is fulfilled, the form must change. This is not abandonment by the universe. It is intelligence. Nature does not repeat lessons unnecessarily. When the wound is seen, felt, and integrated, the obsession loses its grip. You don't have to fight it away. It dissolves on its own. And in its place, something steadier arises. Self-trust. You begin to trust your emotions instead of fearing them. You begin to trust silence instead of filling it with stories. You begin to trust that peace is not the absence of love, but its most mature expression. This is the point where many people realize, I don't need to understand everything to be free. Understanding was a coping mechanism. Control was an illusion. What heals you is presence. Staying with yourself when there is nothing to chase. Staying grounded when there is nothing to fix. The twin flame journey was never about union with another person. It was about reunion with yourself. And the pain? It was never proof of love. It was a signal guiding you back to the places within you that were ready to be reclaimed. In the next chapter, we will explore what truly happens when you stop chasing healing through the connection and begin to reclaim your energy, your identity, and your sense of inner authority. Because the end of obsession is not emptiness. It is the return of your power. There is a moment on the twin flame journey that feels almost invisible from the outside. Nothing dramatic happens. No final conversación. No grand realization that suddenly fixes everything. Yet internally everything shifts. It is the moment you stop healing for them. For a long time your inner work may have looked sincere, even spiritual. You meditated. You journaled. You analyzed your triggers. You tried to become better, lighter, more healed. But underneath all of it, there was a quiet expectation. If I heal enough, they will come back. If I grow enough, the connection will align. If I become whole enough, the universe will reward me. This expectation is subtle. It hides behind spiritual language. It disguises itself as self-improvement. But it is still a form of chasing. Healing, when done to control an outcome, is not freedom. It is bargaining. And eventually the soul gets tired of bargaining. This is the true turning point. Not when you stop loving them. Not when you stop believing in the connection. But when you realize you are exhausted from trying to earn peace. You notice it in small ways. You no longer feel inspired by healing content. Affirmations feel hollow. Spiritual explanations start to sound repetitive. You're not resistant, you're complete. And completeness doesn't crave. It rests. At this stage, many people panic. Because healing had become their identity. Without the goal of reunion, they wonder, what am I healing for now? This question is uncomfortable because it reveals the truth. Much of the earlier work was not about self-love. It was about self-modification, trying to become someone who could be chosen, trying to fix what you believed made you unlovable. The twin flame connection amplifies this tendency because it touches the deepest fear of all. What if who I am is not enough? When you stop healing for them, you face this fear directly, and surprisingly, it loses its power. You begin to see that your worth was never conditional, that your growth was never meant to be transactional, that healing is not a performance. It is a return. At this point, something very important happens energetically. You start withdrawing your attention, not as punishment, not as avoidance, but as self-respect. You stop scanning the external world for signs. You stop interpreting silence as meaning. You stop orienting your emotional state around another person's availability. This is what people often mistake as detachment. But detachment is not indifference. It is sovereignty. Your energy comes home. And when energy comes home, clarity follows. You start noticing how much of your life was placed on hold. Dreams postponed. Joy delayed. Choices filtered through the question, how will this affect the connection? This realization can be painful, not because you lost something, but because you see how much you gave away. And yet, there is no blame. You were doing the best you could with the awareness you had. The twin flame journey required this stage, because without fully exhausting the old pattern, you would never release it. True transformation does not come from force, comes from saturation. You don't let go because someone tells you to. You let go because there is nothing left to hold on to. This is when the inner dialogue changes. Instead of asking, what does this connection want from me? You ask, what do I need right now? Instead of wondering, how can I align with the outcome? You wonder, how can I be honest with myself? Honesty becomes your new compass. You stop bypassing uncomfortable emotions with spiritual explanations. You stop labeling pain as lessons to avoid feeling it. You allow yourself to grieve not the person but the fantasy of rescue, the fantasy of destiny fixing everything, the fantasy that love must be difficult to be meaningful. Grieving this fantasy is not cynical. It is mature, because it clears space for something real. As you reclaim your energy, the twin flame connection changes shape. It no longer feels urgent. It no longer feels central. It no longer feels like a question that must be answered. And this can feel strangely anticlimactic. You might think, is this it? Yes, this is it. Not the end of love. The end of illusion. When healing is no longer performed for reunion, it becomes embodied. You don't try to be grounded, you are grounded. You don't try to trust, you trust. You don't try to detach, you simply stop clinging. This is when your nervous system finally settles. Your body learns that safety does not depend on another person's presence. That peace is internal, not relational. This is a radical shift, because most people live their entire lives outsourcing regulation. They calm down when someone reassures them. They feel worthy when someone chooses them. They feel secure when someone stays. The twin flame journey breaks this dependency, not gently but thoroughly. And once it is broken, you cannot go back. You may still care. You may still feel love, but you no longer abandon yourself in the process. This is the difference between attachment and partnership. Attachment says, I need you to be okay. Partnership says, I am okay and I choose you freely. Only the second can exist without suffering, and it can only emerge after the first dissolves. This is why so many twin flame connections never move beyond pain. Not because they failed, but because one or both partners never stopped healing for the other. They stayed in self-improvement as a strategy. They stayed in growth as negotiation. But growth was never the price of love. It was the path back to self. If you are here at this turning point, you may feel a quiet strength rising. Not excitement, not euphoria, but stability. And stability is not boring. It is powerful. From this place, you no longer ask the universe to bring someone back. You ask the universe to bring alignment. And alignment may look very different from what you imagined. In the next chapter, we will explore what happens after this turning point, when obsession fades completely, And the twin flame connection either transforms into a true soul partnership or releases without pain. Because when you stop healing for them, you finally begin living for yourself. And that is where the real journey begins. There is a phase on the twin flame journey that feels almost anticlimactic. No fireworks. No dramatic revelations. No emotional collapse followed by instant enlightenment. Instead, there is silence. Not the uncomfortable silence you once feared, but a spacious, neutral stillness. This is what happens when obsession finally fades. Not because you forced it to leave. Not because you convinced yourself to move on. But because it has nothing left to feed on. For a long time, obsession felt alive. It pulsed through your thoughts. It sharpened your emotions. It gave every day a sense of anticipation, even when that anticipation was painful. Without it, life can initially feel strangely flat. You wake up and notice you didn't dream about them. You go through the day without replaying memories. You hear their name and your body does not react. First, this can be unsettling. You might wonder, am I numb? Did I suppress something? Does this mean I never really cared? But this calm is not numbness. It is regulation. For the first time, your nervous system is no longer locked in survival mode. The constant oscillation between hope and despair dissolves. Your body no longer prepares for emotional impact that never arrives. Your mind no longer searches for meaning in every silence. This is not indifference. It is safety. And safety for many people on this path feels unfamiliar. Because you learn to associate love with intensity, with longing, with unpredictability, with emotional highs and lows. When those patterns disappear, peace can feel suspicious, almost empty. But this emptiness is not a lack. It is space. Space to breathe without bracing yourself. Space to think without spiraling. Space to exist without referencing another person. In this space, something subtle begins to emerge. Presence. You notice your surroundings more clearly. Conversations feel less charged. Moments feel complete on their own. You are no longer living in reaction. And this changes how you remember the connection. Instead of reliving it emotionally, you can now reflect on it. You see the moments of beauty without clinging. You acknowledge the pain without reliving it. You understand the lessons without trying to extract more from them. This is integration. Integration is what comes after healing. Healing is the process of tending to wounds. Integration is the moment those wounds stop defining you. At this stage, many people realize something surprising. They no longer want answers. Questions that once felt urgent. Why did it happen? What did it mean? Will we reunite? Lose their emotional charge. Not because the questions are resolved, but because your sense of self is no longer dependent on them. You don't need the story to make sense for your life to move forward. This is a profound shift. Because obsession thrives on uncertainty. It needs unanswered questions to stay alive. When you stop needing closure from the outside, obsession has nowhere to live. And in its absence, peace does not announce itself. Simply settles. You may notice it in mundane moments. Drinking coffee without thinking of the past. Enjoying music without attaching it to memories. Feeling joy without guilt or comparison. These moments may seem ordinary, but they are revolutionary. Because for a long time your inner world revolved around something missing. Now nothing feels missing. This does not mean the connection disappears. It changes frequency. Instead of being loud and consuming, it becomes quiet and distant. Like a landscape you once traveled through and can now observe from afar. You don't feel pulled toward it. You don't feel pushed away from it. It simply exists as part of your history, not your identity. This is where many people finally understand something essential. The twin flame journey was never meant to last forever in its intense form. Intensity is a catalyst, not a destination. It initiates change. It disrupts patterns. It forces awareness. But it cannot sustain a life. Peace, on the other hand, can. Peace does not require effort. It does not require interpretation. It does not require validation. It allows you to live fully in the present moment. And from this presence, your values begin to shift. You become less interested in dramatic connections, less drawn to emotional roller coasters, less tolerant of relationships that destabilize you. Not because you are afraid of depth, but because you now understand what depth truly feels like. Depth is not chaos. Depth is steadiness. It is the ability to stay open without losing yourself. It is the capacity to love without abandoning your inner ground. At this stage, you may also notice a change in how you relate to spirituality. You no longer chase signs. You no longer search for meaning in coincidences. You no longer need confirmation that you are on the right path. You trust the path because you are present on it. This trust is quiet. It does not demand proof. It does not argue. Simply knows. And from this knowing, a new question arises, not urgently but gently. What kind of connection do I want now? Not in theory, not in fantasy, but in lived experience. This question marks the transition from healing to creation. You are no longer undoing the past. You are choosing the future. And whatever happens with the twin flame from this point forward.
Reconnexion, distance, hors permanent séparation.
It no longer defines your sense of fulfillment, because fulfillment has become internal. This is why many people describe this phase as liberation, not because they gained something new, but because they stopped carrying something heavy, the weight of expectation, the burden of meaning-making, the pressure to turn pain into proof of destiny. You no longer need suffering to validate love. You no longer need intensity to feel alive. You no longer need another person to anchor your sense of self. And paradoxically, this is the only place where true partnership can exist. Not from need, not from lack, but from choice. In the next chapter, we will explore what happens when two individuals reach this place, and how the twin flame connection can either dissolve with grace or transform into a genuine soul partnership without obsession. Because peace is not the end of connection. It is the ground from which connection can finally be real. Once peace becomes stable, a new truth begins to surface. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty. The twin flame is no longer here to trigger you. This realization can feel strange at first, because for so long the connection existed through activation. Through tension mirrors emotional charge. Without that intensity, you may wonder, what is this connection now? The answer is subtle yet profound. It is no longer a lesson. It is no longer a test. It is no longer a wound being pressed. It becomes a choice. This is where the twin flame journey reaches a crossroads. And this crossroads is rarely discussed, because most narratives stop at reunion or separation. But the real transformation happens after obsession ends, when both people, or at least one, have returned to themselves. At this stage, the twin flame no longer functions as a catalyst. Catalysts ignite change, but they are not meant to burn forever. Once the inner work has been integrated, the same energy that once destabilized you can now feel neutral, even supportive. This is the moment when the connection either dissolves naturally or transforms into something entirely different. Not intensity, but companionship. Not urgency, but resonance. Not longing, but alignment. To understand this shift, we must redefine what companionship means at the soul level. A soul companion does not complete you. They do not save you. They do not awaken you. They walk with you, side by side, without pulling, without chasing, without fear of loss. This kind of connection can only exist when both individuals are internally anchored, because companionship requires two people who are already whole. In earlier stages, the twin flame bond feels vertical, one above, one below, one chasing, one withdrawing, one seeking answers, one triggering silence. This imbalance fuels obsession, but once healing is embodied, the dynamic becomes horizontal, equal ground. Neither is responsible for the other's emotional state. Neither carries the burden of meaning for the other's life. From this place, the connection is no longer charged with expectation. And expectation is what turns love into suffering. If reconnection happens at this stage, it feels entirely different from before. There is no rush to define the relationship. No pressure to relive the past. No urgency to fix what was broken. Instead, there is presence. You meet as who you are now, not who you were when you were wounded. Conversations are calmer. Silences are not threatening. Differences are not interpreted as danger. And perhaps most importantly, You are no longer afraid of losing them, because you are no longer losing yourself. This is how you know obsession is truly over. Not because you stopped caring, but because caring no longer costs you your center. However, it is equally important to understand this. Not all twin flame connections transform into partnership. And they don't need to. Transformation does not always mean continuation. Sometimes the highest form of the connection is release. A release without bitterness, without blame, without unfinished business. You may feel gratitude instead of longing, warmth instead of ache, respect instead of attachment. This does not mean the connection failed. It means it succeeded. The purpose was fulfilled. Many people struggle with this idea. They believe that if a twin flame does not stay in their life, it was somehow incomplete. But soul contracts are not measured by duration. They are measured by depth of impact. Some souls come to stay. Others come to awaken. Both roles are sacred. At this stage, you can finally ask an honest question. Is this connection aligned with who I am now? Not with who you were when you were hurting. Not with who you hope to become to be loved, but with who you actually are. And you are no longer afraid of the answer. If the answer is yes, the connection evolves naturally. If the answer is no, the connection fades peacefully. There is no inner conflict.
No inner negociation.
No self-betrayal. This clarity is the true gift of the twin flame journey. It gives you discernment. You no longer confuse chemistry with compatibility. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer confuse spiritual language with emotional health. You recognize partnership not by how much it triggers you, but by how much it supports your nervous system, by how safe you feel being yourself, by how grounded you remain in their presence, by how freely you can come and go without fear. This is why many people who complete the twin flame cycle find themselves choosing differently in all relationships. They are drawn to steadiness instead of excitement, to consistency instead of mystery, to emotional availability instead of potential. This is not settling. This is maturity. And if the twin flame is part of this next chapter, they meet you there, not as a wound but as an equal. If not, someone else will. Because once you embody this level of wholeness, you no longer attract connections that thrive on imbalance. You attract what matches your regulation. This is the moment when the twin flame becomes what it was always meant to be. Not an obsession, not a destiny you suffer for, but either a gentle companion or a completed chapter. And both outcomes are signs of success. In the next chapter, we will explore the final illusion that often appears at this stage. The belief that peace means something is missing. And why learning to trust calm is the last initiation on this journey. Because when the soul stops craving intensity, it finally becomes available for truth. There is one last illusion that appears near the end of the twin flame journey. It does not arrive with pain. It does not arrive with longing. It arrives quietly, almost politely. The illusion whispers, if it's this calm, something must be missing. This is the final test. Not of love, not of faith, but of nervous system maturity. Because for a long time your inner world was shaped by intensity. Strong emotions meant meaning. Anxiety meant connection. Uncertainty meant depth. When those patterns dissolve, calm can feel unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity is often mistaken for absence. You may notice thoughts like, shouldn't I feel more? Why doesn't this excite me the way it used to? Is this peace or am I just disconnected? These questions do not mean you are regressing. They mean you are standing at the edge of a new identity. An identity not built around emotional stimulation. An identity grounded in presence. The human nervous system is shaped by repetition. If chaos was familiar, calm feels suspicious. If emotional volatility was normal, stability feels flat. This is not a spiritual issue. It is biological. Your body learned to associate love with adrenaline. And now, without realizing it, part of you searches for the old signals. The spikes. The drops. The longing. This is why some people unconsciously return to suffering. They reopen wounds. They revisit memories. They seek signs again. Not because they want pain, but because pain once made them feel alive. Understanding this is crucial. Because if you mistake this phase, you may believe the twin flame connection is fading, when in reality, it has completed its work. You may think calm means the connection was never real, but calm does not erase truth. It integrates it. This phase asks you to learn something entirely new. How to be with love without activation. How to feel connected without intensity. How to experience depth without emotional chaos. This is where spiritual maturity is revealed. Not in how much you feel, but in how little you need to feel to remain present. You begin to notice that peace does not shout. It does not seduce you. It does not demand your attention. It simply remains. First, this can feel almost empty. But emptiness is not lack. It is spaciousness. Space where your identity is no longer wrapped around another person. Space where your emotions are not constantly hijacked. Space where your life unfolds without needing interpretation. In this space, a deeper intimacy with yourself becomes possible. You start noticing subtle joy. Not the euphoric highs of obsession, but the quiet satisfaction of being aligned. You enjoy simple moments without narrating them internally. You feel grounded in your body. You respond instead of react. This is not detachment from life. It is embodiment. Many people fear that choosing calm means choosing boredom. But boredom is the mind craving stimulation. Calm is the body feeling safe. And safety allows creativity, depth, and authentic connection to emerge. This is where many relationships fail to evolve. Because two people may love each other. But if one or both are addicted to intensity, peace feels threatening. They create drama unconsciously. They misinterpret neutrality as distance. They provoke emotional reactions to feel reassured. The twin flame journey exists to break this pattern. To show you that love does not need to hurt to be profound. That connection does not need to destabilize you to be meaningful. That calm is not the absence of passion, but the foundation for sustainable intimacy. At this stage, you may reflect back and realize something humbling. The most painful moments were not the deepest. They were the loudest. Depth, you discover, is quiet. It is the ability to remain open without collapsing. To stay present without gripping. To love without losing yourself. This is the last initiation. Trusting that peace is enough. Trusting that you do not need to manufacture intensity to validate connection. Trusting that your worth is not measured by how strongly someone reacts to you. This trust is not intellectual. It is somatic. Your body learns that nothing bad happens when things are calm. That silence is not abandonment. That stability is not stagnation. And once your body learns this, the journey completes itself. You stop searching. Not because you gave up, but because there is nothing missing. Whether the twin flame remains in your life or not becomes secondary. You no longer define the journey by outcome. You define it by embodiment. You are present. You are regulated. You are whole. And from this place, love, real love, becomes possible. Not love that consumes you, but love that accompanies you. In the final chapter, we will bring everything together and speak directly to what it means to live beyond the twin flame cycle. Not as someone who escaped pain, but as someone who integrated it. Because the true completion of this journey is not union with another soul. It is reunion with yourself. After the last illusion dissolves, something unexpected happens. You stop searching. Not because you have given up on love. Not because you no longer believe in soul connections. But because the part of you that needed to search no longer exists. For a long time, the twin flame journey gave your inner world a direction. There was always something to figure out. Something to heal. Something to wait for. Even pain had purpose. Pointed somewhere. But now there is no arrow. No urgency. No invisible thread pulling you toward a future moment where everything will finally make sense. And at first this can feel disorienting. Because seeking had become familiar. Seeking had become identity. Without it, you may wonder, if I'm not searching for reunion signs or meaning, what am I here for now? This question marks the true beginning of life beyond the twin flame cycle. Because now your life is no longer a preparation for something else. It is the thing itself. You begin to inhabit your days differently. You no longer view time as something to endure until a turning point arrives. You no longer divide your life into before and after someone else's return. Moments are no longer placeholders. They are complete. This is subtle but radical. For the first time, your sense of fulfillment is not deferred. You don't feel like you're waiting for permission to live fully. You simply live. And this changes how you experience love, purpose, and connection. Love is no longer an event that happens to you. It is a quality you bring with you. You notice this in the way you relate to others. You listen more deeply, not to be understood, but because you are present. You give affection freely, not to secure attachment, but because it feels natural. You allow closeness without fear, and distance without panic. You are no longer measuring connection by intensity. You are sensing it by coherence. Does it fit your life? Does it respect your rhythm? Does it allow you to remain yourself? These questions now guide you more than chemistry ever did. And something surprising emerges. You feel more alive than you ever did during obsession. Not because your emotions are louder, but because your attention is undivided. You are not split between the present moment and an imagined future. You are here. This presence extends into every area of your life. Work becomes less about proving your worth. Creativity becomes less about expression of pain and more about truth. Rest becomes allowed, not earned. You stop using growth as a justification for suffering. You stop telling yourself stories about needing to be broken to be meaningful. You realize that wholeness does not arrive as a climax. It arrives as consistency, day after day of choosing yourself without drama. This is where many people finally understand the real gift of the twin flame journey. It was never meant to give you a person. It was meant to give you your life back. Before the journey, you may have lived on autopilot. After it, you live deliberately, not rigidly, not defensively, but consciously. You choose where to invest your energy. You choose which relationships feel nourishing. You choose silence over explanation when needed. And you do not feel guilty for these choices, because you are no longer operating from lack. You are operating from alignment. This also changes how you see the twin flame themselves. They are no longer elevated. They are no longer diminished. They are human. A soul who intersected with yours at a precise moment to catalyze transformation. Nothing more. Nothing less. You can hold them with compassion without romanticizing the pain. You can honor the role they played without anchoring your future to them. This is integration. And integration is freedom. At this stage, many people notice a quiet confidence emerging. Not confidence built on achievement or validation, but confidence rooted in self-trust. You trust your capacity to meet life as it is. You trust your emotional resilience. You trust that even if love comes and goes, you remain intact. This trust changes everything, because now relationships are no longer the axis of your existence. They are part of it. You no longer collapse when someone leaves. You no longer overextend to make someone stay. You no longer confuse attachment with intimacy. You allow connections to unfold organically. And because of this, you attract different experiences. Not necessarily better in a dramatic sense, but truer, more grounded, more reciprocal, more sustainable. You are no longer magnetized by potential. You are drawn to presence. You are not impressed by intensity. You are nourished by consistency. This does not mean your life becomes predictable or dull. It becomes spacious. And in that space, real creativity, love, and purpose can grow. You may also notice a shift in how you relate to spirituality itself. You no longer need frameworks to explain your experience. You don't search for labels. You don't need confirmation that what you lived through was special. It was meaningful because it changed you. That is enough. Spiritual maturity is not about how extraordinary your experiences were. It is about how grounded your life becomes afterward. And now your life is grounded. You show up. You engage. You rest. You love. Not because you are trying to heal something, but because you are whole enough to participate. This is life after the twin flame cycle. Not an ending, but a return. A return to simplicity. A return to presence. A return to yourself. In the final chapter, we will bring this journey to completion. Not by closing a story, but by articulating the deeper truth that was always unfolding beneath it. Because the twin flame journey does not end when someone leaves or stays. It ends when you no longer need it to define who you are. After the twin flame cycle completes, love no longer looks the way it once did. Not because it has diminished, but because it has matured. What once felt like hunger now feels like presence. For much of your life, love may have been something you searched for, something you moved toward, something you hoped would arrive and finally fill a space inside you. Even spiritual language often reinforced this idea. The idea of the other half. The idea of the one. The idea that somewhere out there was a person who would make everything make sense. The twin flame journey intensifies this belief to its breaking point. It magnifies longing until longing exhausts itself. And only then does a deeper truth emerge. Love was never meant to complete you. It was meant to be shared from you. This shift changes everything. Because when love is driven by hunger, it is anxious. Seeks reassurance. It seeks intensity. Seeks proof. But when love arises from presence, it is spacious. It does not chase. It does not test. It does not demand. Simply flows. At this stage of your journey, you may notice that the way you feel attraction has changed. You are no longer pulled toward emotional unavailability. You are no longer intrigued by mystery that destabilizes you. You are no longer excited by chaos disguised as passion. Instead, you feel drawn to coherence, to people whose words match their actions, to connections that allow you to breathe, to relationships that do not require explanation or justification. This does not mean you have lost your depth. It means your depth has stopped performing. Earlier, depth was expressed through pain, longing, and intensity. Now depth lives in consistency, in showing up, in listening, in choosing honesty even when it is uncomfortable. This is a very different kind of intimacy, one that is not built on adrenaline but on trust. You may notice that when you connect with others now, there is less projection. You see them more clearly. You no longer overlay them with fantasies of who they could be. You no longer assign them a role in your healing story. You no longer unconsciously ask them to carry your unmet needs. This clarity is not cold. It is compassionate. Because now, you meet people where they are, not where you wish they would be. And you allow yourself to be met the same way. This mutuality is what real soul connection looks like. Not fusion, not enmeshment, but resonance. Two complete systems interacting without losing integrity. This is where the concept of soulmate quietly transforms. A soulmate is no longer someone who feels familiar because they activate your wounds. They feel familiar because they feel safe. Because your body does not brace in their presence. Because your mind does not strategize. Because your heart does not contract. Safety becomes attractive. And this is often the moment when people realize how much of their past attraction was rooted in trauma. This realization is not shameful. It is liberating. You were not broken. You were patterned. And now the pattern has changed. You begin to experience love as something steady rather than consuming. It does not sweep you away from yourself. It anchors you more deeply into who you are. You feel more creative, not less. More expansive, not constrained. More expressive, not cautious. This is because love is no longer trying to heal something. It is simply expressing itself. At this stage, you may also redefine what spiritual connection means. Before, spirituality may have felt abstract, symbolic, or dramatic. Signs, synchronicities, numbers, cosmic narratives. Now spirituality becomes embodied. It lives in how you treat your time, in how you listen to your intuition, in how you honor your boundaries. You realize that the most spiritual act is not interpreting the universe. It is responding to your inner truth. And your inner truth no longer speaks in urgency. It speaks in calm clarity. This clarity allows you to hold paradox. You can believe the twin flame connection was meaningful, without believing it must define your future. You can honor the depth of what you felt, without needing to recreate it. You can trust love again, without needing it to look like the past. This is integration at the level of identity. You are no longer someone who went through a twin flame journey. You are simply someone who is present. And presence changes how life unfolds. Opportunities appear not because you are searching, but because you are available. Connections deepen not because you pursue them, but because you are open. Your life becomes less about narrative, and more about experience. And in this lived experience, you discover something quietly profound. You are no longer afraid of love. Not because love cannot hurt, but because you trust yourself to remain intact. This trust is the foundation of everything that comes next. Whether you enter a partnership, remain single, or move fluidly between phases of life, you are no longer defined by relational status. You are defined by relational integrity. How you relate to yourself, how you relate to others, how you relate to life as it unfolds. This is what the twin flame journey was pointing toward all along. Not toward another person, but toward a new way of being. A way of being rooted in presence rather than pursuit. In wholeness rather than hunger. In choice rather than compulsion. As this chapter closes, you may feel a sense of quiet recognition. A knowing that nothing is missing. That love is not something you are waiting for. It is something you are already living. In the next chapter, we will speak directly to the lingering question that remains for many. What happens if the twin flame reappears after all of this? And how to meet that moment from truth rather than old patterns. Because completion does not mean life stops surprising you. It means you meet every surprise as who you truly are. Even after peace has settled, one question often remains. It does not disturb you the way it once did. It does not keep you awake at night. But it lingers quietly, in the background of awareness. What if they come back? This question is not a sign of attachment. It is human. Because meaningful connections leave an imprint. The difference now is that the question no longer controls you. Simply exists. And how you relate to this possibility reveals how deeply the cycle has been completed. In earlier stages, the idea of their return was loaded. It carried hope. It carried fear. It carried expectations. Your nervous system reacted before your mind could respond. Now the idea feels neutral. Curious perhaps. But not urgent. This neutrality is your greatest protection. Because if the twin flame does return, it will test something new. Not your ability to endure pain, but your ability to remain grounded. Reunion at a higher level does not feel like fireworks. It feels like recognition without collapse. And this is where many people get confused. They expect the return to feel like the past. Intense. Emotional. Overwhelming. But if it feels that way, it is not a new chapter. It is a relapse. True reconnection after integration feels ordinary. Not dull. But calm. Your body does not tense. Your mind does not race. Your heart does not leap ahead into the future. You stay present. This is the first sign that the meeting is happening from truth rather than longing. At this stage, you are not meeting the twin flame to complete something. You are meeting to see what remains. And what remains must be evaluated honestly. Not through spiritual stories, but through lived experience. Do they respect your boundaries? Do they communicate clearly? Do they take responsibility for their emotional world? These questions matter more than synchronicities. Because soul alignment without emotional maturity is not partnership. It is repetition. One of the most important distinctions to understand here is this. Not every return is an invitation. Sometimes the return is a test. A test of whether you will abandon yourself again. For the sake of familiarity, the old energy often tries to reassert itself. Old dynamics, old roles, old emotional triggers. But now you feel them immediately. Your body recognizes what no longer fits. And instead of rationalizing discomfort, you listen to it. This is how you protect your integration. You do not need to reject the twin flame. You simply refuse to re-enter patterns that cost you your peace. This is not punishment. It is clarity. And clarity does not require explanation. You may notice that if reconnection happens at this level, conversations unfold differently. There is less storytelling about the past. Less need to justify or defend. More curiosity about the present moment. You are not trying to merge lives. You are observing compatibility. And this is a crucial shift. Because earlier compatibility was irrelevant. Intensity was enough. Now, compatibility is everything. How do you feel after spending time together? More grounded, or more confused? More open or more guarded? Your body gives you the answer before your mind tries to interpret it. And you trust that answer. If the twin flame has also done the work, the interaction feels mutual. There is no chasing. No withdrawal. No emotional games. Just two people meeting as they are. If they have not, the difference is obvious. You may feel compassion but not pull. You may feel warmth but not attachment. And you let the moment pass without clinging. This is mastery, not dominance, not indifference, but self-respect. You are no longer proving your worth through tolerance. You are honoring your worth through discernment. This is the real meaning of unconditional love. Unconditional does not mean unboundaried. It means loving without losing yourself. Whether the twin flame stays or leaves again, the outcome is no longer central. Your center is. This is how you know the journey has reached completion. The twin flame is no longer the axis of your emotional world. They are a participant, optional, not necessary. And this does not diminish the sacredness of the connection. Completes it. Because now love is no longer fused with fear. Connection is no longer fused with anxiety. Choice replaces compulsion. Presence replaces projection. This is why many people who reach this stage are surprised by their own response. They thought reunion would feel like a climax. Instead, it feels like a conversation, a meeting, a moment, and then life continues. This is not disappointing. It is freeing, because it means you are no longer living inside a story. You are living inside reality, and reality is flexible. It adapts. It unfolds. It does not demand that you sacrifice yourself for meaning. If the twin flame remains, it is because both lives genuinely align. If not, you release them without grief. Not because you did not care, but because caring no longer means clinging. In the final chapter, we will bring this entire journey to a close, not by summarizing what happened, but by articulating what has changed at the deepest level. Because the completion of the twin flame journey is not about what you gained or lost. It is about who you became. At the end of the twin flame journey, something becomes unmistakably clear. There is no dramatic ending. No final revelation that changes everything overnight. No cosmic announcement that the lesson is complete. Instead, there is a quiet shift in identity. You are no longer someone who is on a journey. You are someone who has integrated it. For a long time, the twin flame story gave meaning to your inner world. It explained your pain. It justified your longing. It offered hope during confusion. It gave structure to chaos. But now, that structure is no longer needed. Not because the experience was false, but because you no longer need a narrative to hold yourself together. You have become the ground. This is what completion truly feels like. Not excitement, not relief, but solidity. You are no longer oriented around an absence. You are no longer organizing your life around a question. You are no longer defined by what you are waiting for. You are here, and here is enough. Completion does not erase memory. You remember the intensity. You remember the love. You remember the pain. But memory no longer pulls you backward. It informs without consuming. It teaches without binding. This is the difference between carrying an experience and being carried by it. The twin flame journey at its core was never about another person. It was about identity collapse. The collapse of the version of you that believed, I am not whole unless someone chooses me. I am not safe unless someone stays. I am not complete unless love looks a certain way. Those beliefs were not wrong. They were learned. Learned through early attachment. Learned through loss. Learned through survival. The twin flame simply brought them to the surface, so they could no longer operate unconsciously. And once they were seen fully, they lost their authority. You no longer live from deficit. You live from presence. This presence changes how you move through the world. You speak more honestly. You leave situations that drain you without over-explaining. You choose rest without guilt. You no longer perform healing. You embody it. And embodiment is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation. It does not need to be understood by others. You feel it in your body, in how you breathe, in how you pause before reacting, in how you remain intact when things don't go as planned. This is the real initiation the twin flame journey was guiding you toward. Not reunion, but self-authority. Authority over your emotional world. Authority over your energy. Authority over the meaning you assign to experiences. You no longer give that authority away to people, to signs, to stories. You trust yourself. And trust is the foundation of freedom. From this place, love becomes something entirely different. You no longer ask love to save you. You no longer ask it to heal you. You no longer ask it to define you. You meet love as a whole being. You choose connection not from hunger, but from resonance. Not from fear, but from desire. And if love leaves, you do not collapse. You grieve if needed, but you remain anchored. Because love is no longer your source. You are. This is not emotional detachment. This is emotional sovereignty. You are capable of deep intimacy without losing your center. You are capable of commitment without self-abandonment. You are capable of endings without devastation. This is what the journey trained you for. And now you live from it. At this stage, many people realize something quietly radical. They no longer need to identify as someone who had a twin flame. They are simply someone who knows themselves. The label falls away. The story softens. What remains is wisdom. Wisdom that cannot be taught, only lived. You understand now why the journey had to unfold the way it did. Not because suffering was required, but because awareness needed contrast. You had to experience fragmentation to recognize wholeness. You had to experience obsession to recognize presence. You had to experience loss to recognize self-trust. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. And nothing needs to be repeated. This is completion. Not as an ending, but as a return. A return to yourself. Before the seeking began. Before love became a question. Before connection became a wound. You do not return unchanged. You return with depth. With discernment. With compassion. With clarity. You return knowing that no one completes you. And because of that, you are finally free to meet others without burden. To walk beside them, not ahead or behind. To love without contracts. To choose without fear. This is the partnership of souls the journey was always pointing toward. Not two halves becoming one, but two wholes meeting in truth. And if you are listening to this now, know this. If you have reached the end of this cycle, you are not behind. You are not late. You are not missing anything. You are early to a life lived from integration rather than longing. From embodiment rather than obsession. From presence rather than pursuit. The twin flame journey did not take something from you. It gave you back to yourself. And that is the only reunion that lasts.